You know your cue, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Welcome back. This is Sierra.
And this is Mr.
And as you can tell by the title, today we're going to be shooting another one of our many China adoption series videos. If you guys are new around here, or especially if this is your first time here, then you guys should know that we are an American family who lives in Japan. And every week we try to make a new video about our life here and also how we live a little bit more sustainably. The big part of our life here as of late has been adoption, because we brought our son home, was it October?
October, yeah.
Yes, from China. And so he's been home for a little over 8 months with us. And because we've had such an amazing experience with the China adoption program, we decided to make this series to help other people adopt or clear up misconceptions about the China adoption program or whatever. It's just, I like to make videos about what's really on my heart, and so this is what's been on my heart as of late. So anyways, I think that's everything for the introduction.
Yep.
Okay, so this video is a video that is kind of a long time coming, that for a while we weren't sure that we wanted to make, because as you guys know, right now there was this family who had to dissolve their China adoption, which is really sad for the entire adoption community, especially for this family. And we thought that maybe if we made this video and shed a little bit of light on the things that we struggled with and the people that we knew struggled with throughout the adoption process, it might bring a little bit of light to the situation, or just make the process seem a little bit easier or a little bit less scary. So anyways, with that, we are going to get started.
Sounds good.
Okay, we have a list somewhere. Yes, we have a list of things that we struggled with or that can be difficult about the China adoption process. So I think we're just going to go through the list and we're going to talk about them and tell you our thoughts.
So what's first?
All right, so let's see. A lot. So the first thing that makes the adoption process incredibly difficult from China, and this goes without saying, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, and it is the amount of time that it takes and the amount of waiting that you genuinely have to do. The process takes on average
9 to 18 months, I believe.
Yeah, when we sign up with our national adoption agency, we actually asked them how long the average process is for their agency, and they said it is about 18 months. But they said they have seen some adoptions go through in as little as 8 months, but it was the second adoption, and I think that it was, somehow they found out that it was a biological sibling, and so it kind of moved the process a lot faster for them. But then again, it was their second or third time adopting, and they had all their ducks in a row, and when it's your first time adopting, you usually don't have all your ducks in a row. To be honest, you don't even know where your ducks are. They're not even in the same pond.
So how long did it take us?
I think it took us 18 months, about the average, or the long, like the average time.
Yeah.
So as we were already saying, it's like this is just a very, very, very long process. And what else makes it really difficult is it's a little bit different from birth, because when you give birth, you don't have an exact timing, but you have a pretty good idea about how long it's going to take you from conception to arrival. And with international adoption, it's not like that, because there's just paperwork time, and you just don't know if it's going to be 9 months or 18 months or 36 months. You really have no idea.
The worst part is you submit something and then you have to wait a month for you to get back, and then you have to submit something else, you have to wait another month, and that keeps on going over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's true. We actually had a video about all this stuff. If you guys want to check it out, I'll drop it up in the cards. But in between each one of these steps, you have to wait. So like,
we get into number 2, where there is a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, you're right. So as I've already said before, we already made a video about all the different steps in the adoption process, which again, I put it up in the cards for you guys. But as you are working through these steps in the process, you don't necessarily always go with them in order, and you don't necessarily do one after the other. Sometimes you'll be doing 2 things at once. And in addition to that, when it comes to the different steps, there are a lot of different yet similar requirements to each step, and it's really easy to get confused sometimes on what step you're actually doing, or you know that you're collecting this marriage license with a special document attached to it, but you're not sure if it's for your home study or if it's for your dossier paperwork, and it just gets really frustrating. And I know a lot of agencies are really good at organization, but at least within our brains, I felt like, I don't know, what do you think? That like everything was happening at the same time.
Well, I felt like we were doing all this paperwork, but I didn't know what went to where. It's just, here's the checklist, all this stuff you have to get in, or just submitting this stuff over and over and over again.
Yeah, and then there were a few times they're like, oh, we need another copy of this, and like, we just sent you one. They're like, no, we need another special fancy copy. And I was like, all right, moving on to number 3. One of the things that makes this process really frustrating, and we touched on it a little bit, is paperwork accuracy.
I felt like I was reading a tax document. I didn't know what the heck to put down for where. Is it this or is it that? Half the time I feel like you need a lawyer.
It's true. Sometimes I think we should have hired a lawyer for this process. I think it would have made things so much easier, and we could have just been like, you know what? Talk to our lawyer. And if you guys can't figure it out, we'll have them write up paperwork to help you figure it out. And in addition to that, another thing that is really difficult and frustrating with the paperwork process is that it seems like you almost always have to have an update of new paperwork, even though your paperwork was completely fine to begin with, but for some reason they have to have updates.
Yeah, and also some documents expire, like your fingerprints and background checks and even birth certificates. What?
I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that some countries, like France for example, your birth certificate and marriage licenses actually expire after 6 months. From what I've heard from French people I know, it's kind of like a life certificate, and so it is updated every 6 months if you get married or have a birth or something like that. So your birth certificate is kind of more of a life certificate, but in the United States, it is not like that. And the last time I checked, my birthday was still my birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we only got married once, right?
Yes, only married once.
So like, we haven't done a renewal or anything, but as far as I know, like once you're married, that's it. You don't have to get more papers for that. Apparently with adoption, you do.
And next we come to policy changes.
Boy, they.
So apparently, while we were going through this whole process of our adoption processing, a certain policy change which made it so that a military U.S. base is no longer classified as U.S. territory if it's outside the United States.
Oh my gosh.
This caused major problems.
It really did. Oh my goodness. So we actually talked about that a little bit more in our China adoption horror stories video. It's a series of 2 videos. I'll put those up in the cards for you guys. But the short version is 2 days after we were supposed to leave China, there was supposed to be a policy change that would require a change in the specific visa type that our son would have to come back with us and enter the United States. But, as I said in the other video, the consulate in Guangzhou decided that even though the policy hadn't taken effect yet, they were going to go by the new policy.
Lovely.
Yeah, so we found all this out when we were at the consulate. And that was not helpful because, as you guys saw in the horror story, it caused a basic fiasco of the last 3 days that we had together in country.
Do I hear some stress?
Oh my goodness. I don't know how we survived, to be completely frank. I don't know. And then in addition to that, with international adoption, policies in general are always changing. And over the years, there have been a lot of different policy changes with international adoption program even in China, and you never know when things are going to change. So you could have all your paperwork in and correct according to the law now, but then all of a sudden either the United States or China could change their mind, and then suddenly your paperwork is no good anymore.
That reminds me of another thing. At the time we were doing our adoption, we were going through the whole problem of the U.S. and China relationships. We weren't sure if we were actually going to do this. I was fearing we were going to be told, I'm sorry, no more adoptions from China.
Yeah, that was one of my big fears too. Okay, moving on to number 5. Now this part is a little bit tricky and we may or may not need to cut out some parts of it. So if the things that we say don't really make sense, or if the editing is weird in the next few minutes, we're sorry about that. But it is problems not necessarily only with our agency, but with agencies in general that can make the process really difficult. We did talk about this a little bit about how to choose an adoption agency before, so that's also going to be in the cards for you guys, but we have a few more things we also want to talk about that.
In general, all adoption agencies are different in some way or another.
Yeah, there's a lot of adoption agencies. Again, I keep forgetting to look up how many, but they all have different rules and they all do things a little bit differently. So, for example, if you are following our particular adoption story and following the ways that we did things, but you were going through a different agency, it may not necessarily be the same for you. So that can be really frustrating for families because they think one thing is going to happen and then it ends up turning out another way. Now the next one is agency specific, but I don't necessarily think that it would be just for our agencies, but sometimes when your agency gives you your initial sign-up contract or your initial application contract, they put down a list of what's going to happen in the process, but they don't necessarily always give you the biggest details. We felt like we didn't necessarily get a full picture of exactly how the process is going to go and what we should expect from our agency. The next thing that was really frustrating with our agency was the whole visa fiasco. And Mr. is going to talk about it because I will lose my mind if I keep talking about it.
So when we went to get the appropriate visa, we went to our agency asking them questions like, well, which visa do we need to go with? They didn't know. So like, okay, well, can you find out? So it took them, I don't know how long, but weeks on end. And
they were doing research for us. They were going to help us out.
And then all of a sudden they come back saying, we think it's this one, but we're not sure. And so we put forth a visa, however, it could have had a different visa, which would have been much better for us and caused us a lot less stress. So be careful with which visa you go with.
The thing is, like, we were paying them for a service, so in our opinion, or at least in my opinion, they should have researched and told us exactly what visa we needed. Because had we started the visa process that we are working on right now with little man, we would have already had everything sorted out and dealt with. But no, because they made the mistake, or they wouldn't even bother to do the research, and because they didn't have their stuff together and they didn't give us the correct information, here we are in the situation we're in right now, which we are going to make a video about that once it is all cleaned up. So stay tuned for that and make sure that you subscribe. But oh my word, too much. Next trouble that we had with our agency specifically is that there seems to be within certain agencies a culture of just naivety. And what I mean by this is when we would ask them a question about pretty much anything, the response is always, we don't know, we'll get back to you. And right before travel especially, and especially now that we are home, I know that this agency has done a lot of adoptions, but I'm not convinced they've ever done an adoption through China. Like, it has to be, in my opinion, their first adoption from China. Otherwise, they would not have made as many mistakes. They wouldn't have always been like, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. And treating us like we were stupid the entire time. And it made me so freaking frustrated. And the last thing that was really frustrating with our agency, and I've heard other families have problems with in general, and a good thing to ask about, is what their contact will be like for you when you are in country. When we were in country, we had a handful of questions that we needed our agency specifically to answer for us that our guide wasn't able to answer, and we even had some problems with our guides, and so we would send them emails. Within 24 hours, 40 hours, we heard
nothing.
Crickets. For example, we had a pretty big issue when we were in a train station, and we messaged them about it, and we were pretty much saying, why didn't you warn us about this situation before? And it was crickets. I don't want to say too much on here, but like, it ended up costing hundreds of dollars. And it made me so angry that they just couldn't have figured it out, or at least told us about it ahead of time. And then the last thing that was really difficult that might be frustrating to you, depending on your agency, is how they treat their customers. With our specific agency, Mister's going to talk about it because I'm, again, still really upset about it, so go ahead.
So when we tried to make changes to our plans, they gave us a comment such as, but that'll hurt our relationships, and so we can't do that. Rather than putting us in front as the customer is always right, or first, or whatever, they want to put their contacts ahead of us, which is just like, what the heck?
So like, give a specific example.
So we want to change a hotel. They currently had us booked at a hotel where they're charging us this outrageous charge for a meal plan as well as hotel stay. And I'm like, I can use my points and save us thousands of dollars and not have to do this. And they're like, no, we can't do that because that's going to hurt our relationship with our Chinese affiliates. And I'm like, I don't care. You're trying to charge me thousands of dollars, which is not valid. This is no good. We
don't want to say the hotel chain, but we have actually worked with one of the hotel chains in the past for various trips. And when you make a hotel reservation with them, as long as you cancel within 48 hours, it's not a big deal. And you don't have to pay any fees. But according to our agency, apparently there was a cancellation fee. And now, like, the more we've talked about it, the more we realized that they were just trying to suck more money out of us.
That's horrible. Yeah,
and they were basically putting the welfare of the organization over the welfare of their customers, meaning they basically wanted us to pay an extra, what was it? It would have cost, what, $700 extra the few days we were there?
More than that.
Ridiculous amount.
It was, yeah, it was in the thousands, I believe.
Yeah, it would have cost us thousands of dollars more to stay in the place that they made a reservation for us. And I mean, we were able to change hotels after a whole lot of paperwork and a whole lot of like angry phone calls and emails, but it was just so frustrating, and it felt like that throughout the entire trip. And I know that this can be an issue with certain agencies as well. In addition to the hotel, there were things like various tours that we had to pre-book and prepay for, and we weren't really allowed to plan anything for ourselves outside of what our organization had planned for us because they just wouldn't let us, which is stupid. And now if I look back, I would have just told them, we're gonna rip up this agreement and we're gonna ask for a referral for a different agency right now, even though we're already here, because this is really frustrating. And then afterwards, another issue that we had when we came home from China, we were still upset about some things that happened in China, and we were upset about some other things that happened in our process. And once again, when we reached out to them for questions, we heard
nothing.
Right, it's like these problems didn't exist, and we were being dramatic because we weren't happy with the services that we received. And they kept telling us, oh, well, you got your child, so you should be happy. But I'm like, right, but like, I would like the hundreds of dollars that we got cheated out of throughout this process back, please.
Okay, moving on, number 6, logistics.
This was a nightmare. Now, I know that the logistics situation, by logistics I mean getting things from place to place and getting things organized the way that things need to be organized. And I know that we had a very different experience because we are expats living overseas, and most of this has to do with specifically document delivery and moving paperwork around. And because we are expats, we ended up spending a lot of money having to pay for things like couriers to take our paperwork back and forth. Another thing that really added a lot of time to our process is because we are expats, taking paperwork from Japan to the United States and back takes about 10 days, 12 days ish. Yeah, something like that. And so rather than sending a certified document from one place to the other in 3 days, it took 10 days. And so it ended up causing a lot of struggle in our process just because we spent so much time waiting on the mercy of Japan Post and the US Postal Service.
Moving on to the next one, stress and preparing for unknown situations.
If you're one of those people who doesn't get stressed out, I would guarantee you 100% that the China adoption process will stress you out for so many reasons. Like, oh my goodness, where do we start?
I don't know.
I don't know. Throughout the entire 18 months that we were going through the process and we were waiting on documents, there was always this feeling of just not knowing what was going on and not knowing what was coming next.
I always feared that it's just not going to go through. Something's going to fail. Something's not going to go through. All this work is going to not. I just always feared about that.
Yeah, for sure. And actually during the process we had to have the psych evaluation, which we talked about in the process video. And it was funny, the psychologist asked us, aside from this whole adoption situation, because he was familiar with international adoption, he asked us if there were any stressors in our lives. And he said that if we said that we weren't feeling stressed about it, he would think that we had some kind of mental condition. Because how can you not be stressed about going through the process of international adoption and being forced to see a psychologist to make sure that you are mentally fit to become an adoptive parent? That's not stressful at all. But after he said that, like, I felt like my stress level with the entire appointment situation just went down. All right, in addition to just the general stress of the situation in general, the next thing we're going to talk about that could be really stressful when it comes to the unknown actually is probably the source and one of the reasons that the family everyone is talking about had to dissolve their adoption, and that is unknown medical issues or just unknown issues about your child in general. When we adopted our son, when we got his medical file, all we received was his intake paperwork, which isn't that the paperwork they get when they first find the child?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and that's basically like the basic little physical that they give them to make sure they don't have HIV, check their blood work and all that stuff. And then we had 2 audiograms.
Yep.
And 1 more basic medical form that had been done a year later, and at the time that was given to us, that was 1 year old already. And so we were like, okay. So we took all that paperwork and we sent it off to an international adoption medical counselor slash doctor in, I think it was Colorado.
It was Colorado,
yeah. And when she sat us down, she told us everything that she saw in our son's file, and we talked through it all. And within that same appointment, she also warned us that even though like this paperwork that we have is probably correct, we don't necessarily know what has developed since this paperwork was done and what the severity of things that are yet to be diagnosed in his paperwork. So it can be really scary because we were pretty sure that we were adopting a child from China who was deaf, but as far as any other medical needs, we really didn't know what to expect. And so we started learning sign language and we basically just prepared for our best, but just not knowing that there could be some kind of medical thing going on that you have no idea about, and you only have, 18 hours between placement and signing your paperwork finalization in China. It would be really difficult to meet your child and then like be 100% sure of what is coming home with you. But the last thing within this category that can be really difficult and stressful and cause a lot of struggle in your adoption is just the overall preparation for your new family member when it comes to preparing the child's room, preparing your family for the new family member, preparing the house, preparing your community. You just have so many unknowns within that. Like for example, when it comes into preparing your child's room, we didn't know what he liked. We knew that he was a preschool age, but we didn't know if he liked blue or green or mountains or cats or monkeys. We didn't know. So we just did his room in like a generic outdoorsy type theme. I figured if we didn't like it, we could just save it in case we adopted a second child and use it again or give it to a nephew or something. Yeah, and then with our family, I feel like our families are both really good throughout the process. But again, like, how do you prepare and how do you involve someone in your adoption story when you don't have anything to share? And now moving on to number 8, the last and final category of things that can make the international adoption process difficult is the questions. questions from family, questions from friends, and questions from friends of friends that somehow heard about your adoption via social media or through your church. People ask a lot of questions at international adoption, and depending on your agency, I can't speak for every agency, but our agency had some social media rules in place, and they told us that we really shouldn't share certain pieces of information until we have our letter of acceptance. And so you have all this information, but you may not necessarily be able to share it. And then people who know that you're adopting will ask questions, and then you either have to lie to them or say nothing in the situation. Anyways, I think that's the end of the list. Anything else that was difficult for you throughout the process?
I think you covered all the bases.
I'm tired. That's a lot. So if you guys are still watching at this point in the video, thank you guys so much for supporting us and supporting our channel. We really, really appreciate that. If you've liked what you've seen so far, which obviously you did if you are still watching, so make sure that you like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys for watching. Bye!
Bye!